Welcome to Nell and Matt's Obsolete Movies, the podcast where we revisit movies from our 20 plus years now of collecting films on obsolete formats. Basically, we review films from the VHS era, though not always on VHS. And our film for this episode is 1987's Moonstruck, which is on VHS. Getting it, I believe you said it was a gift from your sister, right?
My sister.
And this is a kind of special movie for me. This is, I believe, the first movie my family rented when we got a VCR. We, put an RCA model something on layaway at the Middlesex Mall Kmart. Then after 6 months or something, we brought it home. There was a mom and pop independent video store down the street from the house. They even had footlights on the shelves, and it just seemed so glamorous to, grab the box and then take that opaque white plastic clamshell home, watch this movie. I was 12, so this movie was about grown-up stuff that was boring. And then not knowing, because you had to rewind the tape, we didn't know you were supposed to hit stop, so we watched the film, and then we watched it in reverse. VHS experience. So I thought, why not kick off the new year with, again, the first movie ever watched on home video.
Nice. Well, as Matt mentioned, I'm pretty confident this was a gift from my sister, and this is one of our favorite movies that we'd watch together. With it coming out in '87, I didn't see when it came out because I would have been 11 at the time. So it was probably the early 90s that we really got into it. Maybe when I was around 13 or 14, we really started watching this movie, and we'd watch it together. My sister was dating her now husband at the time, who comes from a very Italian family, and I think it kind of connected to us on that level, that it just kind of reminded us of some of the personalities and family members for the movie. So I have this great personal connection, as well as
my father being very Italian, my grandparents not on that side, not being born in this country, both born in the Calabria region of Italy. Revisiting the film now, I was like, oh yeah, that's ethnic.
That's ethnic is a good way to put it. Though this film was really well received. Yes. It made $80 million on a $15 million budget, and it received an Academy Award nomination for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Screenplay, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Screenplay, and won for Cher, Best Actress, Olympia Dukakis, Best Supporting Actress, and for Best Original Screenplay. Yes. And John Patrick Shanley, who wrote the screenplay, is actually a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. And he wrote the screenplay, is actually a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. And he wrote The Parable Doubt, the one about the priest being suspected. He wrote that, really kind of deep intellectual, really heady type of play. And then he also wrote Moonstruck, which is kind of an interesting...
Well, there are these sort of literary elements to the Moonstruck script and the Moonstruck story. There is Americans don't really do magic realism. Magic realism is more for, sort of Commonwealth literature, of the British former colonies. But there is a magical, fantastical... happens to be this magical Brooklyn where it's a full moon for 3 or 4 days in a row. Right. And miracles happen, and there is a whimsy to the play that's very interesting in style of the film. That's very interesting and stylistic. Right. A lot of times when films have a fantastic element, it's this disruptive thing that happens that comes out of nowhere. And this idea, I think, of being moonstruck is really, it's the whole film. The whole film is about being, there's very little time. To, of them not being moonstruck.
Yes.
And for me, one of the interesting early scenes in the film is when Cher and the Danny Aiello character are in the Italian restaurant, and it is this whimsical what you think or hope, and it is this whimsical what you think or hope every time you go into an Italian restaurant that's not Olive Garden, but actually has somebody's name on the door. The experience I think you're trying to buy,
right,
is this place, and they, you know, it's Johnny, the Johnny character, proposing to Cher. And it's so fascinating because there is absolutely no chemistry between those two people. Like, this is not a romantic night out. This is a business lunch.
Yeah, you know, I actually was thinking about this, is presented within this film. And there is this kind of, you know, there's different theories about the different types of love. And there's one, it's like pragmatic love. And where it's just like, at this particular time, I need a wife who knows how to cook and clean and take care of the kids. And for that, that very much feels like their relationship. She really wants just somebody to get married to. He is fearing be taking care of him, and so he needs someone to mother him. She doesn't have anybody and is getting older, and it feels just like a transition.
It's a good pair of socks.
Yes.
They're a good pair of socks. There's no passion.
No.
Which, again, I think is just beautiful, like, showing, not telling basic writing 101, basic creative writing 101.
Yes.
You know, you don't have to announce that you can't, I mean, that's the other thing, too, is, like, you can't imagine these characters having sex.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, you just can't, or it would be characters having sex.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, you just can't, or it would be, you know, I guess just missionary, and it would be, like, every third Wednesday from, you know, after the Carson monologue, first commercial break, turn out the light because I have a meeting in the morning, kind of thing. Kind of thing. And so, and the Cher character as the main protagonist, I mean, this is a nice ensemble cast, though. Yes. She is the main character. She's an accountant. She's super practical throughout, working on the funeral home's bills, and then, you know, she's at a florist, and she's like, you know, I don't see the point of flowers. It's a lot of money for something that's just going to go in the garbage, which is, like, so unromantic.
Well, to kind of go back to that scene where you feel like he is complaining that he's losing his best bachelor customer to another waiter. And the other waiter says, how do you know? And he's like, oh, he planned it. He's going to propose marriage. He has to get the champagne ready. So it was planned, but he didn't even think about the ring.
Yes, he forgot the ring. He didn't get on...
think about the ring.
Yes, he forgot the ring. He didn't get on one knee.
Yeah.
I don't think the appetizers had shown up yet.
And even in the car on their way to the airport, he's like, oh, he's kind of giving this look of like, oh, did I make the right choice?
Yeah.
And to go back to storytelling, like, I do think they do those little key little details really tell you about the nature of their particular relationship.
Yeah, and they're also, I think, in a weird way, kind of relatable,
right.
And it invokes these ideas of, you know, of a Brooklyn, of an Italian-American experience that, yeah.
So I really connect this, thinking about the types of romantic comedies that are out there.
Okay.
And so if you think about it, and let's put it in like almost Shakespearean terms. So there's the Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
And so the, you know, romantic film, there's the, you know, two lovers fighting against, you know, romantic film, there's the, you know, two lovers fighting against odds, that Romeo and Juliet concept. And then there's the other huge romantic comedy trope that most romantic comedies follow, which is boy meets girl, boy and girl fall for each other, misunderstanding ensues. They break apart, but love brings them back together. So in some ways, Much Ado About Nothing. And then you have another type of romantic comedy that you don't see as often is the magical type. So Midsummer's Night Dream, where it's fairies who are coming in, interrupting everything. For Moonstruck, it is the moon. The comedies might play with all three, but the vast majority of romantic comedies follow this kind of model, or even romantic films follow this model of boy meets girl, some misunderstanding ensues that pulls the lovers apart, but love triumphs all, and they get back together. And that is not at all the structure
of Moonstruck
in any way, shape, or form. And the way it is also so different is that they're older. She's 37.
Yeah.
Cher's character, Loretta, is 37.
She has gray in her hair.
37.
She has gray in her hair.
She has gray in her hair. And also, she doesn't do anything to change to get the guy. Which is also kind of interesting to me because, often a lot of, especially romantic comedy tropes, are that the girl, most Reese and Sandy, where she gets on the leather halter top and does up her hair and smokes and, has on the tight-fitting clothes. Loretta doesn't do that. They actually meet, and she meets, actually, Johnny's brother, Ronnie.
Played by Nicolas Cage.
And
again, where Nicolas Cage Berserker works.
Yes.
Where Nicolas Cage Berserker is appropriate.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, because this is relatively early in his career. So he would have done Valley Girl, which wasn't huge. He had bit parts in, like, Lifetime, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Rumblefish. Like, he had these roles. Peggy Sue Got Married. But then this would have been really early. So this would have been a big role for him. And then he went into Raising Arizona and Wild at Heart. And so, like, kind of those Nick Cage films that So in many ways, this was the first, like, mass audience introduction to Nick Cage. And Nick Cage Berserker absolutely works really well. My favorite line is "Bring me the big knife." In that over dramatic moment that Nick Cage is having.
To explain, so Johnny is going to Italy. His mom is dying. He's now engaged. They have to plan a wedding. That's the other thing, the lack of passion, or it's a pragmatic love, but it's also really important. Date, what are we going to do? There's this whole trope around the Cher character about luck, because she did marry for love before, and he got killed. He got hit by a bus. So she's just like, well, I'm not going to, but bad luck. We have to have a real wedding this time. And you have to get my brother to be there. Finding the Nick Cage character, whose name is, I forgot already. Ronnie. And so Ronnie is a fiery, bad pun intended, I guess, baker who doesn't have a hand, who's missing, has a wooden hand. And there's bad blood between them. Element, you realize that the reason why there's bad blood between them is because Johnny went to Ronnie to buy some bread. Ronnie was distracted, got his hand mangled in the slicer, and he loses his hand and his fiancée over this.
Yeah.
And so it's always going to be Johnny's fault, and for 5 years they don't talk, but, he's got to be at my wedding. And so you got to go talk to him. And so there's this, like, great... And again, it's like whenever you do anything that's ethnic, there's always that line between, are you having there's always that line between, are you having fun with, or are you making fun of?
Yes.
And so this idea of the overdramatic, yelly, fiery Italian... which I remember the conversations that my dad and his brothers would have about sport. The conversations that my dad and his brothers would have about sports every Christmas afternoon at my grandma's house, Grandma Uzia's house. And they would just yell at each other. And I remember my mom asking my mom, why are my dad and his brothers yelling, or my dad and my uncle yelling? And she's like, oh, they're just having a conversation. Literally standing up and screaming, Altoon is the most underrated wide receiver in the national. And like had to stand up, and it was like, you know, it was right out of an Arthur Miller play. You know, attention must be paid. You know, kind of moment. And so, yeah, he has that bring me the big knife, I'm going to cut my throat and show you how much I hate my brother. And it'll be your fault.
I'm laughing because, like, I know you shouldn't be laughing at someone threatening to, but Nick Cage portrayal of the scene, for me, it's just so amazing.
It's so over the top. And, again, if there isn't that fantastical element to it.
Right.
And then it's like it becomes cheeseball. But if you're in a world. You are always aware when you're watching this film that you're in this fantastic Brooklyn that doesn't really exist.
And so,
I mean, for one, there's always parking.
You can drive a big car.
That's not Brooklyn.
And so with that, they end up going up to his apartment to talk and get into this very heated discussion about what had happened and the relationships and everything like that.
And she's again trying to be sensible.
What happened and the relationships and everything like that.
And she's again trying to be sensible, trying to talk him down from the ledge, trying to reason with him.
And he is not reasonable in any way, shape, or form with it. But, you know, in thinking about it, because we watched it last night and we kind of walked away and said, let's take some time to process this movie. Because actually, romantic comedy film to watch. Good. So it actually is something huge to get Matt to watch a romantic comedy. But actually, there's this, like, amazing scene because they end up telling each other stories. So, you know, Loretta at one point tells him, like, you're not the only one who's ever shed tears, right? So they're both damaged. He was hit by a bus and killed. He lost his hand and his fiance. And so they're both very damaged people. And they both have not had relationships or any significant relationships since their tragedies. Mm-hmm. He hasn't dated anyone, and she says, stupid. And he asks, well, any other man since your husband? And she said, Ronnie. And he said, stupid, you know, stupid you. And so they get into this really great heated debate. But, you know, thinking about this scene, which the scene is funny because it's like this very passionate scene, and she starts yelling at him, and her theory is that he's a wolf and he gnawed off his own paw to get out of this. He's a wolf and he gnawed off his own paw to get out of this bad relationship. And he's very upset about his brother, and he says, you know, you're going to look the wrong way and you're going to lose your head. And so he's like, bride without a head. And she's like, wolf without a paw. And they're kind of yelling at each other. Bride without a head. And she's like, wolf without a paw. And they're kind of yelling at each other. But the amazing thing, though, if you step away and think about that, they're both kind of processing their trauma, right? And the damage that has happened to them and their inability to be in relationships. And then, you know, Nick Cage gets up, throws for a second, because you can tell he's like, what am I doing? Pauses for a second.
She cooks him a steak, too. There's that great point where she cooks him a steak. He's like, I like it well done. She's like, no, you're gonna do it raw it would be good for your blood.
You're gonna eat it bloody
for your blood. And he eats a bite of the steak and he goes, that's good. You know, like
she says, wait a minute, stop. He stops, and then she grabs him and kisses him, and they end up having sex together.
Yes.
So, but the great thing about it is, so they're having this discussion around how he hasn't had a relationship. The relationship she chooses is Johnny, which, as we said at the beginning, is a transactional relationship. He's just in relation. And
he's safe, he's stable.
And literally, that's what she says. Literally, like, I'm going to get a husband. That's what I want. And it's almost like it triggers this, like, but why can't we have passion, right? And they end up having this passionate kiss, and they end up going bed together. And it's just kind of like this end up having this passionate kiss, and they end up going bed together. And it's just kind of like this amazing thing of a 37-year-old woman who very much, as I was trying to get to, we kind of meandered off that topic. But she has gray hair. She's very much wearing an outfit that an accountant would wear.
Yes.
Her
hair
does
accountant things.
There's nothing that you would say is like, She didn't show up in a mini skirt with her boobs out and this, like, you know, looking like Cher did in If I Could Turn Back Time.
Yes.
Definitely does not look like that.
Yeah.
But he still finds there's like a passion that emerges from there, which, again, in a romantic comedy, 37-year-old accountant who gets this moment of passion, who has a younger, not necessarily significantly younger, but a younger man who's really into her and is suddenly kind of interested in her. So that's fascinating for me too, because it kind of breaks some of these rules of what a romantic comedy should be.
And so then there's these other elements of romance, because there's also other loves.
Yes.
You know, so the other part of it is the Cher character lives in a multi-family home, or multi-generational family home, I should say, where, you know, she has her parents, she has a grandparent still in the house. The Olympia Dukakis character as her mother, which, again, Best Supporting Actress win for Olympia Dukakis for this character, who is, you know, 60-something. She plays, what, a 60-something at that point? Housewife?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have a lot of adventure, and yet there's a possible romance for her. There is this almost, you know, Ibsen-esque ballroom scene at the Met where she bumps into her father with another woman.
Yes.
You know, and what are you doing? And what are you doing here? Like, you know, you're not here with your fiance, and you're not you doing here? Like, you know, you're not here with your fiance, and you're not here with my mom. Kind of moment that happens.
Oh, we should mention her fiance Johnny has gone to Sicily, to Palermo, to see his supposedly dying mother.
Yes.
And so that's why she kind of has this time to be alone. But yes, so Loretta encounters her father Cosmo at the Met with his mistress, and she's there with her fiance's brother.
Yeah.
And so, I think I also...
And on the same night, Mom goes out to eat and flirtation with an NYU professor. who literally is like, you know, just got dumped by one of his students.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where literally it's, you know, your place or mine. And she decides, no, that's not who I am and that's not my life.
Yeah. So it gives these also these...
you have these other ideas...
So it gives these also these...
you have these other ideas of love and romantic love.
Yeah, I love that it kind of gives you this, like, gradation of what love can be. Because with the romantic comedy, it's usually infatuation. It's usually Eros.
And there's usually...
It's usually Eros, right? It's usually Cupid's arrow.
Maybe the most conventional thing maybe is the Danny Aiello character, that there is this sort of Baxter. There's the guy who's not... who everybody knows right away is not the right guy.
Yeah.
But... they're going to end up together.
Yeah, I love her. I love her dad when she comes home. And the funny thing is she comes home, she stops to get champagne to tell her parents. So literally he comes home, she stops to get champagne to tell her parents. So literally he proposes to her. She drives them to the airport to fly home to Sicily, to Palermo, to see his dying mother. That's their romantic evening after he proposes. Let me drive you to the airport. So she goes home to tell her parents. She tells her father, and you know he's so not excited. And he's like, he has this great speech where he's like, I don't like his lips or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I can't see his teeth when he smiles. I don't like.
What's he hiding?
And he says he's a big baby, and he is like, you know, Johnny really is. He really just wants a mother figure in his life. He at dinner reminds him not to eat the fish because it'll upset his stomach. She gives him gum for the plane in case his ear pops. You know, when he's in Italy calling her, she says, remember to wear your hat in the sun. So that's very much their dynamic of mothering for it. But there's this I love this scene where the dad is giving her all Johnny is a bad choice for her, and even says, why try it again? You have bad luck with marriage. Like, don't even think about it and try it. But I do love that they give you this different looks at what love could be. So you have her parents, Rose and Cosmo, who have been married for a very long time. And their relationship has stalled, and he's now cheating on Rose. But they also give you these little hints that they actually did have a very romantic relationship for a long time. Rose mentions to Loretta that Loretta's younger brother. She was in her 40s when Loretta's younger brother. She was in her 40s when she had him. So obviously they had a sexual relationship up into like the 40s. He's now cheating on her, but she still very much loves him. Then you have the aunt and uncle who have this cute, very adorable, friendly, they're good friends, but they also have a loving relationship. You have Loretta and Johnny, which is this kind of transactional relationship. Then you have Loretta and Ronnie, which is a very passionate relationship. So it's really interesting because you get these glimpses of how different relationships are and can be, and how each one of them works. Which is also fascinating to see, within a romantic comedy, that it's just not one type of love. It's just not the passionate type of love. There can be a variety of types of love that occur in a relationship.
Are we ready for the bottom five, or?
Yeah, sure, let's go for it.
Or the big five, or do you have something else?
No, that's cool.
This movie's still about grown-up stuff for me. I don't know. I'm still 12, I think, watching this film. All right, big five questions. Is it camp, retro?
Classic. I still thoroughly enjoyed watching the movie as we watched it. I think I like that it does not follow the typical romantic comedy tropes. I like the characters. I think they're very fascinating. I like Loretta's story arc. I like the fact that she's an older woman who has given up on love and given up on having a relationship, but is still able to have a relationship and is still deserving of a passionate love.
Yeah. And that she's not really changed. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not like she has to change to be with the guy. It's, maybe she has to make a decision.
Yes.
Which it works out. I'll go with it classic as well. I think it's a really nice 80s movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be one of those, like, if you want to understand what 80s movies, right. I think that's got to be on the list of, like, that's got to be on that syllabus.
And I think, the director did Jesus Christ Superstar. He did Fiddler on the Roof. He did In the Heat of the Night. So the director of the film is just when you look at his list of films, you're like, wow, like he decided to do Moonstruck. So the direction is really well done, and he pulls great performances from all of his actors.
And they're all really interesting characters. I think they're all interesting. And even the Danny Aiello Baxter character his being lame.
Yes.
He's still kind of compelling.
Yeah.
And he's still comedic, and he's still sympathetic.
Yeah.
And so, do I want to ruin the final scene? Because there's this tension in the final scene where everybody is now sitting at this... Again, it's the ballroom at the end, like Ibsen. It's the ballroom at the end, like Ibsen. Everybody's sitting at the kitchen table in that house waiting for Johnny to show up. Whereas, now, and the Cher character has to make this decision between brothers. And, you just think... It's an Italian movie, so there's going to be steak knives, there's going to be curses, there's going to be, I will never speak to you again, kind of Godfather thing that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
Right.
It gets resolved. Much like a Shakespeare, much like Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah.
It works out.
Yeah.
It works out.
Everything works.
Maybe really... So what about the social political distance? This movie came out December 1987.
Yeah, looking at it, so it's set in New York City, and you don't see any other people of color, except
it's an all-white Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think there's a brief shot of kind of...
Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think there's a brief shot of kind of maybe African-American children talking about the dogs, because the grandfather has 5 dogs. But there's no diversity. There's no real diversity in this film. Now... I was thinking about that. There's no real diversity. But, you think very much there's the mugging, right? Mm. You also would think, it's New York. Is she going to get mugged? And is Ronnie going to save the day? And she realizes how much she loves Ronnie. Yeah. No, that doesn't happen, right? And so I was initially when I first saw the film, there's always that thought of, is there going to be this, Is there going to be this, like, person of color who's the bad guy, who's
the
impetus
and those
to something?
were still some of the bad old days of New York City.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but there's... So it's
Koch,
bizarre
York,
because it is very... All you see are Italian Americans in this film. The one diverse character is the professor, college professor, who's probably Irish.
Yeah.
But that's it. And so that's kind of weird that there's no diversity.
I mean, it does, for me, thinking about it, maybe our generation being that kind of in-between generation between, you know, the 20th century and the 21st. Ethnic enclaves? You know, it's even the Pittsburgh that we moved to in 2000.
Yeah.
You know, I think at one point, like, Polish Hill... Something like 90% of the people at one point of the people who lived in Polish Hill were descended from the people who settled Polish Hill.
Well, and I think I mean,
you know what I mean? Yeah. So that, I think there's that element of you're like, okay, that it invokes, that's how the world was, were those really the good old days?
Correct.
You know, where even like, you know, my grandfather being Slovak in Johnstown, only lived in the Slovak part of town and only went to the Slovak bars, because if you went to an Irish bar, part of town, and only went to the Slovak bars, because if you went to an Irish bar and you were Slovak, that's tense.
So that's strange. The other thing is just, I mean, they live in Brooklyn in the massive house. The dad drives a Cadillac. Johnny drives a Lincoln. And so, like, it's weird in the sense of, like, that house is probably now a $5-6 million home. And so I think that's weird. There's actually a funny scene of gentrification because he's kind of like, Cosmo, the father's a plumber. He goes to do a bid on a house with a waspy couple that, you know, is a white upper middle class couple, and he's talking about the benefits of copper pipes. And so there is that brief sense of like that change that's happening in the neighborhood, that there are different wealthier people coming in and changing the neighborhood, but I think gentrification being so really real in New York City, it was weird to see this kind of side of New York City, and not talk about, say, like the poverty and all that other stuff. I mean, it does
in its fancifulness invoke. Now, the other thing that we did talk about in terms of distance, though, and again, the two strongest characters I think written in the script, the two most well-involved characters, are the two characters who's the actresses won Oscars.
Yes.
Olympia Dukakis and Cher.
Right.
And that the other are in some ways, they are the protagonists, they are the richest characters.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Cosmo is funny. You know, Grandpa barely says anything. He just has his 8 whatever pack of dogs that he walks. You know, he's only got a few lines in English in the film. You know, Nick Cage Berserker.
Yeah.
You know, and it really is Cher and Olympia Dukakis' characters who really are the centerpieces of this film.
Right.
And so I think that's interesting, again, in terms of maybe thinking about gender. Even though it's, you know, because, again, love is fraught with, you know, when you get into marriage and business transactions and the roles that you play domestically. Yeah. The roles that you play domestically, like, that can be really fraught and, for, you know, some women, dangerous. And
Excuse me. Well, I think also thinking about it being in an 80s film, you know, because our parents would have gotten married. You know, my parents got married when they were like 19, 20. They were relatively young, with a sense of, if you're not married by 37, you're done. And so I think there's also that generational distance that's kind of interesting, that Loretta is 37, and she's not married. Yeah. And she's a widow, or at least she was married for a couple of years, but her husband tragically...
Doing the math. So it was 5 years ago. So 70. So she got married at 30.
Yeah.
Which even then is still...
Yeah, so she mentions she waited for love. And I believe at the very beginning when she's introduced, they say her married name is Clark. And so it would have been an Irish person. That she got married to.
Yeah.
But she does mention that she waited for love and that she wanted to wait for children to have a child. And then he tragically died. But I think there's also that distance of thinking that, like, even at 30 or late 20s, early 30s, people were already viewing her as an old maid, and what is wrong with you? Why haven't you gotten married? So I thought that was an interesting distance as well. So if you're now in your 30s watching it, you're probably like, what's the big deal that she's not married? Who cares?
Yeah.
But at that time, even in the 80s, you think about it, like...
Yeah, that would have been when my sister got married at 18. Yeah. And, like, it was the summer she turned 18.
Yeah. Yeah, where that is that kind of push to get married right after high school or right after college is not... I don't feel it's as there as it used to be in the past. Yeah.
So, all right, question 3. What about the technical distance?
As it used to be in the past. Yeah.
So, all right, question 3. What about the technical distance?
So the technical... What's your next question? I forget about it.
The room test.
So can I mention one other thing that I think is kind of... Before we talk about that. I think it's interesting... So Olympia Dukakis, Rose, is trying to figure out... no proof.
Yeah.
She has no proof that he's...
But she just knows.
She just knows that there's something different in their relationship.
There's a line early on where she goes to speak... you better go tell your mother. Yeah. You know, and so Dad's up, Mom is in bed, and she says something like, yeah, and then he's going to fall asleep and not touch me.
He was listening to, It Must Be Him. Why do men cheat on their wives? Why do men run around? And Danny Aiello's character says, a fear of death. And she's like, that's right. And so when Cosmo comes in, after he has just been at the Met with his mistress, she's like, Cosmo, you're going to die. Like,
no matter what you do.
Everywhere you're going to die. Which I love that. I love that line in that scene. I think that's also interesting, like, the exploration of why someone might cheat on you.
Yeah.
And you don't really get that a lot in movies of, like,
why
is that? And it's a romantic comedy, so it's a kind of like this almost darker, interesting topic of why do some men feel the need to cheat? And then you have the very obvious professor who's sleeping around with his students, which is that very bad stereotype of him just kind of liking young women and their energy to talk about in terms of relationship dynamics. But I apologize. Go ahead.
That's okay. So, the technical distance, whether it's the effects or the lack of internet in the film.
Yeah. I mean, there was, like, you think about it, like, when Johnny shows up to the house late at night looking for Loretto, and Mom is like, I don't know where she is. She would have just texted her at that particular moment. That kind of thing, like, oh.
It's how people live, man.
So that...
Long distance phone calls,
correct. Those type of things.
Yeah.
Oh, and you could even go and send somebody off at the airport. Yeah. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah, and you know what, though? Yeah, there's a lot of shots of the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of this magical New York. In fact, even on the cover of the box.
Yes.
You notice, actually, the VHS box I noticed is the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
That's there. I think the film still looks really good.
It does.
I mean, again, the lack of effects, there's just shots where the moon's really big. And I was actually, when I was watching the credits, there was like literally 6 people who were in charge of the moon shots. Of getting good footage of the moon. Yeah. Which is, I think, great. And it still looks
Yeah.
Which is, I think, great. And it still looks really good. And it, again, relies on a story and people.
Well, and I think the benefits of having a really talented director as well who worked with it.
Yeah, and I think it passes the room test. There is nothing in it that is so just wooden hand.
Yeah.
And the scene where he's cutting the steak with his hand, or sometimes he has this, like, the final scene at the kitchen table in the family home. He's got this giant blue glove on the hand. I mean, but I think that's part of the comedy. That's part of the whimsy that, he's got he's got all this rage, and then he tries to hold a fork with his wooden hand while he cuts his steak.
Yeah.
And so is it a keeper?
I think, it's a keeper it's a keeper for me.
Yeah.
I think it's a really well done film. And I read an article a few months ago where Nick Cage was being interviewed and talking about his career now and just that his hubris of being younger and that he sometimes would just, you know, we had this conversation of like the Coen brothers work with, how many films has John Buscemi? It's like, it seems like they have these cast of actors that they like to work with again and again. And Nick Cage, they never worked with again.
And he is the only major actor that did not like working with the Coen brothers.
And just talking about Nick Cage, talking about how, you know, in his career, earlier in his career, he would just do whatever he felt the need to do. Like, he would just do whatever he felt the need to do. Like, he would just like, no, this is how I think this person is. I don't care what you say. I'm going to play it this way. My favorite one is Peggy Sue Got Married, which was Francis Ford Coppola directed it, his uncle. And he just decided to do this completely ridiculous voice. And his uncle couldn't even convince him. Look at this. And I think it's like his instinct was really good for this film. And I think other films, his instincts have been really bad, which has gotten him in trouble. But his instincts for this role were really good. And I think Olivia Dukakis and Cher do amazing jobs with their roles. They're such strong women, so intelligent, so witty and funny and strong. They're just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful characters to see. And again, I keep bringing it up. I like the fact that it's a middle-aged woman able to find love again and being just deserving of finding love again. And that it doesn't follow those typical romantic comedy tropes.
Yeah, I'll go with that again. First movie my family ever rented. So it was important. It was real.
Absolutely.
And again, if you want to understand 80s cinema and what Moonstruck is a film, I think, that has to be on your list to understand the 80s.
Absolutely. So during quarantine, go ahead and check this one out.
Yeah. It's still going to be a couple more months, so check it out. Bye!